Hello, BookTube, and welcome to Poetry Thursday. This is an embattered, tiny little BookTube event that just a handful of people and me do every Thursday, where we read you a poem. Most of my fugitive compatriots in Poetry Thursday merely read you a poem. They don't gas on about it, but I don't think there's much chance of that on this channel now, is there? And I am once again drawing from this anthology. I'm going to work my way through this anthology all year long. For Poetry Thursday. It's 20th century American poetry. Although we've seen it's the long 20th century. We have actually yet to read an author who published their poems in the actual 20th century. But it's the long 20th century. This is really well done. I was very happy to find this. I keep thinking that maybe I should do more poetry. For a while there, I was doing a poem every day. And if I do this for Poetry Thursday, we'll still be doing this in 2028 during the Trump administration. But we'll keep going through here, and we'll go to Charlotte Perkins Gilman, who a lot of you will know, at least because you read her story, The Yellow Wallpaper. Or maybe if you went a little bit more in depth in college, you might have read her novella Herland. She was. I saw one commentator very witheringly refer to as a proto-feminist, which gets it wrong on a couple of different points. And her fiction sank like a stone in her own lifetime, in her own career. She was better known in her own career as a poet. So I think it's only fitting that we read a poem. This anthology includes 2 poems. One of the poems is shorter and a little bit dumb, as a lot of the poetry at the time would strike a modern reader. And one of them is a little longer, and I like it a little better. So we'll read that. We'll read the poem called An Obstacle. I was climbing up a mountain path with many things to do, important business of my own and other people's too, when I ran against a prejudice, and that's with a capital P, that quite cut off the view. And you see the sing-songy, almost elementary school rhyme scheme there that was very popular. It was very didactic poetry style of, I'm going to put this in verse. It's definitely not prose, but it's mainly meant as a sort of sing-songy thing to teach you a lesson, which had a limited audience at the time. It was a bigger audience now. It has no audience now. My work as such could not wait, and my path quite clearly showed. My strength and time were limited. I carried quite a load, and there that hulking prejudice sat all across the road. I spoke to him politely, for he was huge and high, and begged that he would move a bit and let me travel by. He smiled, but as for moving, he didn't even try. And when I'd reasoned quietly with that colossal mule, my time was short, no other path, the mountain winds were cool. I argued like a Solomon, he sat there like a fool. Then I flew into a passion. I danced and howled and swore. I pelted and belabored him till I was stiff and sore. He got as mad as I did, but he sat there as before. And then I begged him on my knees I might be kneeling still, if so I had hoped to move that man of obdurate ill will, as well invite the monument to vacate Bunker Hill. So I sat before him helpless, in an ecstasy of woe. The mountain mists were rising fast, the sun was sinking slow, when a sudden inspiration came, as sudden winds do blow. I took my hat, I took my stick, my load I settled fair. I approached that awful incubus with an absent-minded air, and as I walked directly through him, as if he wasn't there. And you can see, just in terms of verse there, that every stanza is self-contained, except for the last 2. That merge into each other. It's at the end of the penultimate stanza. So I sat before him helpless in an ecstasy of woe. The mountain mists were rising fast. The sun was sinking slow. When a sudden inspiration came, as sudden winds do blow. That ends the penultimate stanza and leads you straight on to the next one. The idea of an inspiration isn't concluded in that stanza. You have to go to the next verse. You have to go to the next stanza in order for it to be concluded. I took my hat, I took my stick, my load I settled fair. I approached that awful incubus with an absent-minded air, and I walked directly through him as if he wasn't there. That is the solution to all didactic poems have a neat little solution, which is, in this case, how do you deal with what the author's referring to as a prejudice. although it's also an incubus and also an obdurate man in the course of the poem. And the poem's narrator is making the case that being nice, arguing, kicking and screaming, resigning, sitting down and crying in that wonderful phrase, an ecstasy of woe, that none of that will work. That all of that just feeds a prejudice or a presupposition or anything, whatever the ideological monster is here, that the only thing to do is just ignore it, just walk right through it. Which, as is true with the best didactic poetry, there is a kernel of truth to that. It's just, I like it. I myself would have been one. I was not. Those of you who might be wags about my 28 years old, I was not actually in the audience for didactic poetry in the 1880s. Okay. But had I been, I would probably have liked it more than most people do, certainly more than most people do in the 21st century, where it has fallen fatally out of vogue and it's just not there at all. I tend to like it, especially when the author has their eye on something true, which Charlotte Perkins Gilman often did. I still worry a little about that proto-feminist label, although she certainly, if you want to use that odious label of a proto-feminist, she certainly fulfilled two of what seemed weirdly to be the prerequisite qualifications for a so-called proto-feminist, which is that she was an indifferent wife and a poor mother. At least she understood that. She saw both of those things as true and made accommodations as best she could. And had a brave ending. She had a brave ending, which always counts for something with me. We most of us don't ever get to being King Leonidas and the hot gates of Thermopylae. We most of us don't get to bravely face off against a rain shower of Persian spears. Most of us don't get to be Custer, firing away at the last minute, surrounded and fighting valiantly to the end. Most of us have to show our valor in a lot more humble ways than that. But it's still real. Valor is when you don't cower. Valor is when you face reality and don't cower. And go out the way you came in. Go out as you mean to live. And that comes in all shapes and sizes. As some of you know, some of you are exhibiting valor every day in your own everyday lives. No one will ever mark it. No one will ever know that it's true. But it is true. And I always value that. That speaks to me. I look to that and I sort of nod my head in that direction. And Charlotte Perkins Gilman ended her life. She took her own life when she got a diagnosis of breast cancer and knew what was in front of her in an age without medicine. She knew what was coming. And she chose to forestall it when anyone in her life at the time, even the people that she had made enemies of deservedly, would have begged her not to. But she saw what the path most likely would been there and decided, no, I don't want that. I think that's that aspect of her life is really well dramatized. It's really well and intelligently delved into in the 10 800-page biographies that she's had in the last 60 years. Except she hasn't had even one. So, although the blue check marks on Twitter would certainly agree with me, I'm not their ally when I say there's a long way still to go when it comes to paying attention to. She was a great artist, I think, in her way, a flawed artist. I said that her fiction sank like a stone, and you'll notice that my voice did not have any note of mourning. I've never been all that big a fan of her fiction. Her nonfiction polemical work is, I think, really good, tremendously interesting, and with a passion that I don't think she brings to fiction. I don't think that her heart was ever in fiction. But again, if you want to study that at the hands of a great biographer, well, let's hope that Stacy Schiff lives to be 300 and writes a book every year, because apparently it's not going to happen any other way. Anyway, imagine it. This person, the yellow wallpaper is taught in every school in the country. Every year, in every school in the country. That's millions of people who read that story. Anyway, that's Poetry Thursday, unfortunately. Maybe you're getting a really good example here of why other people don't extemporize poems. Because otherwise you'd get this. You'd get a horrible old man yells at clouds every single Poetry Thursday. But we'll move on. I'm just going to stick with this with this anthology. So we'll move on next time, and I will try not to sermonize quite so bad. So that was Charlotte Perkins Gilman. I imagine that a lot of you are bigger fans of her than I am. A lot of you probably really like the yellow wallpaper. Feel free to browbeat me into reading it again if that's the case. But just the other day, for instance, I had, I think it was a Library of America volume of all of her stuff. Beautiful thing. Had it in my hand for free, and I didn't put it in my box. Just the other day that happened. But anyway, we'll wrap this up, and I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.